Hello and welcome to another episode of Seed Speaks. My name is Sonja Begemann. I'm the editorial director here at Seed World Group, and I'm excited because today we're talking about a subject that I think is going to hit home for so many of us, and that is how to manage priorities, personalities, and productivity during busy seasons. When I think about what's going on right now in the Midwest, it's planting season for farmers, seed companies, agricultural businesses, and this is one of the busiest and most important times of the year. When you throw in things like what happened in my hometown last night, tornadoes, hail like we saw in Illinois earlier this week, Mother Nature is just upping the ante and increasing the pressure, which can make some employees feel a little overwhelmed. Joining me today are two experts who are going to talk about how to avoid those feelings of being overwhelmed and how you as a manager can help those employees. First, I have Norm Dreger. He has more than 30 years of experience in agribusiness, previously with Syngenta. Today, he serves as a consultant with Osborne Interim Management in Calgary, Alberta. He has experience working with companies and cultures around the world, building revenue, managing a variety of teams, and working hand in hand with customers. Thanks for joining us, Norm.
Thank you.
Also joining us today is Phil Durst. He is a field-based educator at Michigan State University Extension, where he uses his more than 30 years of experience to work with farmers. He specializes in how to improve employee management on farms and has published multiple papers on the subject. He also serves as the president of the National Association of County Agricultural Agents. Thanks for joining me, Phil. All right. Well, first, let's talk about what busy seasons can do to the employee psyche. And Phil, I'll have you start. What does this busy time do to the employees who are already carrying a heavy load of day-to-day tasks? You've got these day-to-day tasks, and then you're adding more on. What does that do to the employee psyche?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sonja. And it's really important that we recognize that in agriculture, we do face busy times. We ask more of people in busy times. But maybe in management, we make assumptions about the workload ahead and expectations. And the question is how we communicated well and prepared our people for the upcoming busy times. I believe it's important to prepare people mentally and emotionally in regard to their expectations. Because in general, employees are willing to work more. They're willing to work longer hours, faster pace for a period of time, but only if they believe in the goals, can see that they're helping to reach those goals, and that they do not feel used. They may feel used if they don't see management preparation for those times, maybe such as hiring temps to relieve some of the load, or participating alongside them, or supporting them extra. We don't want people to feel used because that just makes them a tool and not a person. A leader, and that's what management has to be, a leader of people, cares for the needs of his or her employees. It's also important to recognize that long work, hard work, takes a toll physically, mentally, and emotionally on people. And that toll may show up as simple errors that they usually don't make, or a failure to think things through, or missing things that seem obvious. They need to be able to see an end to the extra demands. They need to be encouraged to progress, and they need to be reminded of important basics. People can become discontented, and that often is based on unfulfilled expectations. Unfulfilled expectations relate back to what we've prepared them to expect, how we've communicated with them. So I think it's really important that as we prepare for these busy times, that we talk with employees about what they can expect and how you will support them.
It's interesting that you say that, because it's communication, and it's communicating not only what you're doing, but the value you're providing and the end goal. And I think that's really critical. And Norm, I'm really curious, from a manager's perspective, you work in interim management, you have, 30 plus years of experience in management. For you as a leader, why is the attitude or the way in which you carry yourself during those busy times so influential to those employees you're working with?
Well, I believe it's important because they're looking for leadership, but also camaraderie, from my experience, what they're often looking for, especially during busy times, was someone to help prioritize the workload and someone to help simplify it. And you use that word as well. What to do. For me, that was always prioritization, what's important or not right now, today, or this week, or next week, what can wait till later, how urgent is it? So not only prioritizing the tasks so they know what they're really needing to focus on that day when they show up, but also helping them to figure out how to do it. So how to simplify the workload if possible. And there's lots of tools and processes and shortcuts one can use to automate and calendarize, but to really help them figure out the what, and then help them figure out the how. And what you're really doing, I think, when you do those two simple things, is helping them to focus and helping them to be more efficient. And when you say carry, how does one carry themselves? Why is that important? I think that really ties back in what both Phil and yourself mentioned, which was that it's about one's behavior. It's what they're hearing and what they're seeing you as the leader do. And that's really a big part of your communication. That's extremely important. And I'd like to think too that the leadership doesn't always have to come from the one individual. It can come from the rest of the team, other people that they're working with that step up to the plate, maybe have more expertise and can take on the next big task.
Mm-hmm. We've all heard and seen, a good leader isn't someone who points at you and says, you should do this. A good leader is someone who picks up the load with you and helps you carry it. And so it's great to hear both those perspectives, because that leans into that idea of a true leader is a good team player who can help with these things. So when we think about the ag industry, it's seasonal. Right now it's planting season. We're going to be coming into spraying season, scouting season, insect season, fungicide season, you name it. We've got all these cyclical things, and we have harvest. And then of course we have, equipment maintenance and preparing for the following year. So when we know that this is a seasonal industry, that seasonally we are going to be more busy than others, how does that seasonal nature of this industry maybe help us as employees or us as managers prepare better so that we're not feeling so overwhelmed, or so that our employees are not feeling so overwhelmed? And Phil, I'll have you start.
Well, I want to use a baseball team illustration. If you indulge me, I'm a baseball fan, and this is baseball season, and my team is playing right now, and the Detroit Tigers, go Tigers. And in a stretch where there's a lot of games, especially double headers or something like that, where the players are playing back-to-back games, a good manager will schedule rest for key players, because he knows that in order for them to achieve more, to achieve their best, they need rest. They can't just play every single game and be at the top of their game. They need to have rest. And so as a manager of people, you need to think about the toll that these busy times are going to take on people, and be able to give them the time they need in order to recover and come back and give their all. And so it may mean cross-training employees so that they can do different jobs. It may mean having those temp employees that can take some of the load. And so it's important to recall and remember the demands and what those will mean on people. I often say that being a leader of your employees means working to meet the needs of your employees, even as they work to meet your goals. And when that's your attitude and your plan, then employee retention is often improved and absenteeism is reduced. Right. I had a call yesterday from a dairy farm owner, and he said, Phil, these gas prices are rising, and they're pretty high. And he says, I'm concerned that my employees are going to say, hey, I don't have money to put in my gas tank to come to work that job that only pays X dollars. And so we talked about this thing of recognizing the stresses that employees are facing, whether that's caused on the job or whether it's off the job, recognizing those stresses and doing something about it, even if it's just recognizing with them the stresses, but doing what you can to do about it, to take something like that. And then the other thing that we have to recognize is that when we're asking a lot of employees, we're also asking a lot of their families, because that employee is not there to say, pick up the kids from school because they're in the field or they're doing something that demands their time, or they're not there at mealtime. And so what can we do for family members, and how can we prepare families for these times of stress? Because really, families are the reason that our employees go to work. And they don't want to sacrifice family for work. They want to have both. And so it's important that we do things to care for family and manage the expectations and the needs of family during these high stress times as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, Norm, I'm curious from your perspective, you worked some high level jobs, and you spent a lot of time in the ag industry. What personally have you done when you prepare for these overwhelming seasons that are coming to help yourself be prepared to do a good job, to help yourself be mentally prepared? And maybe, exactly what Phil said there, how did you help prepare your family to know, like, hey guys, I may not be home in time for that baseball game or whatever it might be?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because it's the working life and personal life aren't so easy to separate sometimes. And I had a lot of travel as well. So it was important, I think, to get them to recognize that it doesn't matter what job you're in or what industry you're in, you're always going to have busy times. Everybody has busy times. If you're in the corporate world, a lot of the roles, if you're R&D or seed production, et cetera, it's going to mimic the busyness that our customers, the farmers, are having. They're also volunteers. And so there's a lot of things they're doing on the side that can't just be shut off, and they've got to learn how to manage that. What we tended to do is a lot of planning, and I know I've mentioned earlier, helping them figure out what to do, but how to do it. And that's what we did a lot of during the off season, particularly wintertime, was not just budgeting, but talking about how we're going to use resources, not just money, but particularly our time. And so there were territory plans, there were country plans, really relevant to the position you're in. But a lot of time talking about what we're going to do, and then how we're going to measure it as well during the season. Because if they just get into the busyness of running around like a chicken with their heads cut off, and they don't have some structure and process for how you're now going to track and measure the things you've been planning for leading up to the season, then it's easy to totally lose track of what the focus was supposed to be. So there are a lot of team sessions, a lot of one-on-ones as a coach, because knowing your team, you can tell which individuals are probably going to not manage it as well as others. And a lot of discussion around contingency plannings as well, and flexibility needed to kind of make changes as the tornadoes hit or as the floods hit, and you need to reallocate resources so that they don't freak out. So a lot of talk about flexibility, being able to park things and move to plan B if necessary, particularly in the ag sector where weather dictates so much. And helping them to be efficient, as mentioned earlier, and use different tools to manage what time they do have allocated to a certain task. use that time as efficiently as possible.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said a word there that I think is so important, and I want to talk more about that, and that is focus. When we get this overwhelming time of, okay, I've got 6 plots I've got to get planted in the next 4 days, that takes a lot of time. That's something that has to get done in this timely manner, and we know that day-to-day task is critical. But when we have so many daily tasks like this, it's easy to lose sight of what the big goal is. If I'm training to run a half marathon and my day gets so busy because I've got work and I've got to run kids around and things like that, I can forget, oh, I need to go run 5 miles today to get this half marathon done. You lose sight of the goal because of what's going on day to day. How do you, as an employee or as a manager, keep those big picture goals for the company and for yourself personally in mind while you're inundated with day-to-day busy? We'll have you start with that.
Thanks, Sonja. And you're right, that is the thing that we have to be able to keep in our mind. And a lot of managers are in an odd position. They are an employee on one hand, and they are managing people on the other hand. And so their focus should be on keeping the team moving, keeping the team going, meeting the needs of the team, inspiring the team, encouraging the team, and yet at the same time communicating what management's communicating to them about the goals and the progress on goals. Whenever there's that we're involved in something big, we have to remember the purpose and know the progress we're making. And so I think communicating that progress on a regular basis is important. Now, we talked about the fact that we have busy times and we have not as busy times with employees. And so I think that, and Norm mentioned this in some way, I think we have to make sure that we're investing during the non-busy times in employees. That we're spending more time investing into them. We're spending more time putting into the bank account of our relationship with them during the non-busiest times, so that during the busy times, we're drawing on that bank account of goodwill. We're drawing on the bank account of the values that we've incorporated into them, about the knowledge we've incorporated into them, about the investment we've made into them, because we don't have the time to sit down and have a relaxing cup of coffee with them at that point. But we have the opportunity to do that at other times. So we need to be preparing ahead. We need to be looking ahead during the non-busiest times when we can invest in people, and then we can get the most out of people later. I think core values is a tremendous thing to share with employees. And I think our companies ought to be sharing core values of leadership and the organization. And I think those ought to be communicated throughout the organization. And so I go back a lot of times to what are the values that we want to not only share, but to demonstrate as we work with people. And those are the things that are going to carry us long term.
Mm-hmm. Now, Norm, I'm going to kind of shift the question a little bit for you. You mentioned priorities. How do we prioritize things? And I think that's a really important question to ask. And so with that, how does management, how does leadership communicate this is our end goal effectively, so that then the employees can say, okay, with my end goal in mind, this means X, Y, and Z are the big priorities. The rest can fall in as necessary.
Well, as Phil alluded to, we did a lot of training in the off season, and certain portion of that was very standard that the whole team needed, and it was to help them have the toolkit that was going to be required for the coming season's priorities. There's a portion that was also customized to the individual to really help them where they may have a few deficiencies, and of course people were coming and going at different stages of their careers, so you always needed a portion of training that was customized to them. And I always found, regardless of the position I was in, the ag sector invested a lot more in their people than other sectors did, and I'm referring there to some experience I had when I took an MBA much later in life, And so I had the opportunity to interact with people from energy and IT sectors, and they would hear about the 1 or 2 or 3 weeks that were being invested per employee. That was a stated target. And they just flabbergasted that an organization would spend that much on their individuals. But they did, and they did it consistently. And that was, I think, because in the ag space, we tend to bring people in, train them up, because we believe they're going to be with us for a longer period of time than maybe some other sectors where people bounce around a little more. So there's a lot of investment in training, a lot of time spent on coaching and help people in coaching roles to do it well. And that was all part of the planning that we spoke about earlier. And those are all opportunities where you're talking about the large, big picture objectives of the organization. So you kind of hardwired into all these other things you're doing throughout the season.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we had an audience question come in from Ashley Robinson. And she's asking a question I think that many of us have thought about in our careers. And that is, when you need help as an employee, how do you ask for help in an appropriate way? You're not looking to offload work necessarily, but maybe you're personally stressed out, or maybe you've just reached a point where you don't have the technical knowledge. How do you ask for help in an appropriate way that doesn't look like you're being lazy, but also keeps your colleagues in mind, so you're not pushing work off onto them that maybe they can't handle either because they've got full plates? Norm, how would you recommend that we do this as employees?
Well, 2 things come to mind. One is hopefully they have a good relationship with their coach, direct line manager, that they can feel safe about going to them, that they have some stresses and they're looking for some guidance and support. Hopefully they also within the organization have a mentor that may and is unlikely to be their direct manager, a mentor. They pick up the phone and chat something through with them that's keeping, so here's what's keeping me up at night. I'm feeling like I'm not pulling my weight, perhaps, what could I do? And perhaps there's things that have been set up, like buddy systems in a sense, where they could actually call one of their colleagues because they have a strong team and the organization has invested in the team itself. So they feel safe talking to one another. So it really comes back to the kind of a culture where they feel safe to talk to a number of different people that, to have as a sounding board.
Mm-hmm. And Phil, what about you? How do you encourage employees to get help when they need it?
Yeah. Norm mentioned the psychological safety, and that's really important because when you ask for help, when you say, I need help, you're making yourself vulnerable. You're saying, I can't do it all. And that's real life. That's real people. We can't do it all. We have to express our vulnerability. If we have this facade that we can do it all and we can't, we're going to fail. And what we don't want is employees to fail. What we want employees to do is succeed. And so I think it's important that management recognize that success is going to depend on people working together and picking up where one is weak and picking up where one has needs and helping another one. Success is not individuals doing the max. Success is everybody working together to achieve something, to achieve our goals. Keep reminding people of what we're trying to achieve and the fact that we need each other in order to do that. So I really think that psychological safety that Norm mentioned is critical. And we do that by not criticizing, by not putting people down, by not making them feel bad about asking for help, and by helping them to say, yes, you need help at this point. And there's a time when you're going to be helping somebody else because you're valuable to this organization. We need you, and we need everything that we can work together to achieve.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point. It's not, when an employee comes to you as a manager, it's not, I'm going to criticize you and say you're not doing enough. It's, let's put on a problem solving type mindset. How can we work together to achieve whatever the goal is, knowing that we need to lighten the load from this one employee? So really good point there. We had another question come in from Alex Martin Hahn, and it's also a question that I'm going to add to because it's on my mind as well. And it's, that idea of, how do we address burnout? It's really common during busy times. How do you recognize that you're starting to get burnt out personally? And then as a team manager, how do you address that burnout to keep productivity high? Because obviously that's really important for a company. We have to keep productivity going. But we also don't want to wear out our employees either. So Norm, I'll start with you again. How do you personally address burnout? And then how do you address it as a manager with your team?
Well, it's a good question. Everybody's going to run into it at some point. I think first of all, being able to recognize that it's happening, either to yourself or to a member of your team is pretty important. If somebody's getting tired, losing their enthusiasm, their energy levels are low, they're acting out of character. Maybe got spent a lot of time working with the team about acceptable behaviors and way of communicating. All of a sudden, somebody's snapping at a teammate uncharacteristically. You recognize something's off. Maybe it's at work, maybe it's at home. It's causing them to feel this way. Easily angered, frustrated, spinning their wheels, stressed by minor things. So I think if you acknowledge it's happening and then talk directly to the individual, it can be pretty basic stuff. Let them know you're sensing something's being hard on them, letting them know you're there to help them, and having a very candid, open but private conversation about what's causing the anxiety, and then talk about plans to address it. And they very much need to be part of that. That isn't, I'm not going to imagine you're going to drop in and fix their personal and private issues for them, but you got to let them know that you are going to be an ear that they can lean on, and you can provide some suggestions and together figure out how you're going to figure it out. So the number one thing there, I guess, is just having some trust between you and the individual. And that has to be built up ahead of time. That's not something that, you're going to be able to create at the moment that this issue occurs.
Mm-hmm. And Phil, from your perspective, how do you address burnout?
Burnout is really disengaging from work. It's being at work physically, but not mentally. And it can arise because employees feel undervalued, underappreciated, and because they don't see the results of their work. Employees want to know that they're a valued team member and that they're viewed as an asset by the team and by management. And there are some team busting things that can destroy teams and knock out talented employees. I just want to recognize a few of those. First of all, it could be a poor approach to failure. Employees are going to fail. They're going to do something and they're going to fail. And if management comes at them and just comes down hard on them for a failure, whether that's a failure in time or amount or whatever, that's just not going to encourage them or teach them. It's just going to discourage them and drive them away. And it's not going to create the psychological safety they need. We need to take failure as an opportunity to learn and to build on success. There's another team buster is simply a lack of recognition by the boss. Another team buster that we often don't think about is harassment by fellow employees. And we can't tolerate any kind of harassment by employees or by people who come to the business, whether they're service people or customers. We have to have a culture that does not tolerate harassment, but treats all people with respect, whether they're our employees or whether they're others. And then the last thing that's a team buster is fear. When people have a fear of failing or a fear of some individuals or a fear of whatever, that is not a situation where they're going to thrive, and it tends to disengage them from the work. Your work as a leader is to keep moving employees forward. Training only goes so far. Training takes people from what they don't know to knowing something. But as Norm mentioned, coaching is taking people from not doing to doing. And a coach's role is never over. if you think of your ball teams that you follow, there's always a coach there. The coach is always talking. The coach is always saying something to encourage and keep people moving. Build your people, and they will build the business.
Mm-hmm. Great stuff, guys. As I sat here and listened to you, three keys came up. One is you cannot communicate enough. You communicate as much as you can. Two, both of you mentioned one of the most important things we can do is we can invest in those employees in the non-busy seasons to help them be successful year round. And both of those things, communication and investing in those employees, lead to the most important thing each of you mentioned, and that is trust. Your employees need to trust the managers they work with, their other their coworkers, because that helps them feel supported. That helps them avoid these feelings of burnout, of being overwhelmed, or at least knowing they can go to someone to help them address it. So there's lots more we could talk about. I actually have a whole bunch more questions I'd love to ask you guys, but we are at that half-hour mark, and I want to be respectful of your time. So thank you, Norm. Thank you, Phil, so much for joining me today.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Sonja.
All right. And for everyone watching, be sure to tune in next week as Ashley Robinson hosts an episode all about social media. How do you manage social media personally? And then as a company, how do you address social media usage by your employees? It's going to be a really exciting episode. Tune in Wednesday at noon Central Time. We'll see you next week.